Okay folks, a couple of areas I want to cover today, and I'll do it as two separate sets. One is the week 6 stuff, which is about stakeholders. In other words, the people who are involved or affected by something that's happening. Because these are the things you need to be thinking about in terms of who are you developing these things for, the services, and who's affected. People like the owners, the commissioners, the people providing the funding, providing the resources, and those who get adverse impact. So if you think about the LASCAD problem, one of the sets of stakeholders who were very adversely affected were the patients who were supposed to be being picked up by the ambulances and who didn't, and one or two of them ultimately paid the ultimate price, which is kind of unfortunate, to put it slightly mildly. One of the things we'll do in a little bit, just after we've gone through the sort of introduction, we'll go back to the previous week and look at Zachman, have a little discussion about how Zachman framework actually helps you to develop your ideas, how to develop an understanding of what sort of needs you're working at when you are defining the requirement specification, as opposed to if you're building it and doing the coding. And the second-hand point, as I said, is understand the roles of stakeholders in these IT services so that we can actually get a really good service, one that actually works, that actually delivers value to both the organisation and to the people who are going to use it. Now, when we come on to the group discussion, these are some of the critical questions. Why is the Zachman Enterprise Architecture valuable? What insights does it give us in terms of the really valuable, the really important questions that we need to get good answers to? And then, having thought about those questions that Zachman gives you, and I remind you again, questions, 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 as opposed to answers, answers, answers. Questions are the things that never or very rarely are going to change. And the questions that Zachman brings up today are essentially the same questions that I was working with back in 1974-75 as a trainee systems analyst. They haven't changed in, 40 plus years. The answers today, in a particular context, are likely to be very, very different. And so, questions of frameworks which pose these questions are the enduring thing that I want you to take away with you, that you will be using for the rest of your life, if you work in the field of IT in terms of developing and delivering these services. And then, looking at Zachman, and those key questions at the different levels, those 6 questions at each level, I want you to think about how do they relate to IT service design, delivery and management. And so you can also link that into ITIL, the services delivery and management aspects of ITIL. Helps us to answer some of the important questions about information governance and information system governance. As you start working through this, here there are a couple of sources that I've got for you here. One from quite a long time ago, from Philip McPherson in 1998, and one much, much more recently, the Stevenson, Essen, Gilday and Roberts one, looking at library services, which is kind of pretty close to some of the things that you guys might be interested in. Because you spend a lot of your time using library type services to find that information you need in terms of your research. So here's a couple of useful sources that you might well want to use as part of this idea of what are services, what do we need to think about in delivering these IT facilitated services, particularly this bit about customers. Customers as stakeholders. What do they want? What do they need? And if you think back to last year when you did Intro to Computer Sciences, if you remember one week, I think it was 6 or 7, looked at communication. Those 4 questions about what do you want to say, what do you need to say, and it's the same sort of approach. What is it that our customers really want, which could well be wide, give us the moon. And yet, we can't afford to do that. We probably can't, don't have the time, the resources to give them everything they need and want, and therefore we need to think about what's actually critical in terms of their needs to be able to do what they really have to do. And then, as we move forward into the main part of your research today, thinking about stakeholder analysis. A couple of papers here, one from 2005 and one from 2011, talking about what a stakeholder is, how they fit into the whole idea of developing new things. And it doesn't really matter whether it's IT service or whether it's a new product, white goods, electronic goods, cars, whatever. What we're trying to do is to find out who are the stakeholders and what are their interests, what are their needs, what are their wants. And then there's a more academic one about the theory of stakeholders and some ideas about, again, questions. What are the questions that need to be solved or resolved if you're going to use this idea of who they are and what they are, how they're involved, how they're affected by things. So those are the 2 papers that are critical to developing your understanding, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if you find you need to refer to these in the bibliography for your article as you develop this new IT service or specify the new IT service for your assignment. Obviously 2 is just a starter to give you a feel for where to go, and then from that you can then start looking for more suitable sources which will help you to develop the ideas around stakeholders and their involvement in developing new services. And so using the 4 papers I've given you there, both in terms of the Zachman architecture effects and the stakeholder roles, those 4 papers are going to help you in developing this question. Evaluating the key stakeholders' role in developing the definition of a service. What do they want, how do they want it, what do they need? And it'll include things like interface design, how to get the best interface that makes it smoothest and simplest. And you can look back at the University of Derby student app, which some of you may have seen. How many have seen it, by the way?
I saw it the other week when you showed it.
Oh, yeah. So we've already had a quick look at it, and I think we've discovered it's not the most fantastically designed or implemented thing. So during the main discussion, or the main research, out of it will come these 4 questions. And it kind of shows you also how the Zachman stuff fits together with stakeholders in terms of this high-level approach to specifying, designing this new IT-related service. So that's an introduction to the stakeholder side. And I want to now cover very quickly a couple of items out of the next topic which we need to think about. And this is what we call the technology acceptance model. Because out of it, we want to look at the second question, because that one comes as part of what we're doing today. But there are a range of models which have been developed over the last about 15-20 years about how is it that humans take on board new technologies. And they've been developed particularly in terms of why do we decide to upload maybe a new app onto our smart devices? Why do we try a new service? What causes us to actually become happy doing it? And you know, so examples in banking. In the old days, you had a checkbook, and if you wanted to do anything, you went into the bank and talked to a cashier or an advisor. And then they introduced internet banking, so you could actually do some work. You could actually look at your bank balance online, and then it developed a bit further, so you could actually make transfers, pay some bills, and so on. And then eventually they started, you had the internet on your smart device, and you used the web browser there, and then the bank started producing specialized apps that you could securely, hopefully, connect into your account and do the things that you wanted to do. But there's something called the innovation curve, and there are people who will jump on new technology as soon as it's available, the early adopters. And at the other end of the curve, you've got those who are kind of waiting until it's proven to be safe and secure and working well, and yeah, they've got trust in it. But then again, fragility discourages many people from actually trying out new technologies. I mean, if you look at that little hiccup with iOS 8, that doesn't help people decide to update to iOS 8.0.1 or 8.0.2, 8.1 until it's been there for a while and you haven't got a brick in your hand. Or if you look back at Microsoft Windows, businesses mostly are, 2 generations behind. Half of the businesses in the world are still working with XP because it's reliable, it's proven. I mean, it's out of support now, so people have got the worry of, do they go for Windows 7, a nice stable environment, Windows 8, which is kind of a difficult environment because of the touchscreen capability, those requirements, or do they go straight into Windows 10? And my bet is that most businesses will go to 7 because it's now sort of been there for 3 years or so. It's kind of getting a little bit more stable. It's fairly fast, and it's kind of proven. Because those who went straight from XP to Vista found it was a backward step to some extent. They didn't really like it. It was a bit fragile. It was never developed properly, and so on. In fact, I know that some organizations stayed on Windows 98 for a very long time, missed out XP, and then sort of 2 or 3 years ago thinking, do we go to XP, do we go to 7, do we go to wait till 8 comes along? And over the years there's been a lot of sort of corporate wisdom. Wait at least until Service Pack 2 has been released for any Windows environment before you dare touch it. So there's all sorts of things that discourage us, and what really happened is that IT service management, which is related to those top 2 levels, and product design relates to those 2 levels, we're still thinking about what makes us take it up. And some early research said, well, there's various things that go on in the back of people's minds, which we could call external variables, but 2 things that seem to be driving some of the approach to taking up and actually ultimately using the new technologies. Is it easy to use? Is it likely to be useful? And that kind of led into individualized responses. Do I feel, does my organization feel we want to start thinking about using it? So it's kind of an attitude, I kind of think I would like to. But then that crystallizes, helped by this perceived usefulness bit, into the, yeah, well, I'm planning to use it. Or at least I'm planning to investigate it and see whether it really does what I need it to do. And eventually, out of all of this lot, sometime people say, well, I'm going to use it. Now, that was the first version. A couple of definitions, well, here, which is, do I think it's going to be helpful in doing my job, in doing what I want to do? And is it pretty much effortless? How is that interface designed to make it intuitive so that I don't have to think about where's the help system, where's the manual, because of course most manuals have gone missing these days. You know, it's awfully difficult to find a printed manual for your new camera or your new phone. It's assumed you know how to use it somehow.
Or there's a leaflet saying, go online for this thing.
Or there's a leaflet that says, go online here, and if you're very lucky, it will deliver a PDF which is formatted for a 3" by 4" little booklet, which doesn't print very efficiently on A4 paper, and it's 300 pages long.
Or it has a different version from the one that you own.
Or it has a different version from the one you own, or it's written in a curious form of Eastern or Asian English, which is kind of difficult to understand, which doesn't really help you to find in the menu where is a little button that I know must exist that allows me to do something. Like, it'd be nice on this camera to have a little button that says pause, rather than starting a new recording. I haven't found it yet, I've not actually looked too hard, but Dave just knits them together if I need them to. And here were some questions that were built into the first research into technology acceptance model in the early 2000s, or even earlier than that, around the use of email. And these turned out to be some of the critical questions that people were asking themselves about using email as to whether they really wanted to take it up. Now today, we just kind of use email without even thinking about it almost. It's just sort of part of the background, the infrastructure that we're kind of used to using. If you go back into the 1980s, 1990s, the beginning of email, a lot of people didn't want to use it. It wasn't that easy. And so questions of usefulness became totally critical to their thoughts behind taking it up. And actually you can see it goes back to Davis in 1989, his early research about how people thought about using email, a new technology. You know, does it make it easier to do my job? Does it improve my productivity? Can I get more work done? Does it make me more effective? Does it reduce the time I spend on unproductive activities? And today, you know, given that you've got spam coming through in enormous amounts, I mean about 50% to 70% of all email floating around the internet is now spam in one form or another. How do I make it effective to not spend a lot of time deleting all of that rubbish? And then ease of use. Another set of about 14 questions that Davis asked there. And it's getting easier and easier to use most of the time, but then again, if you start thinking about your web-based emails, it's not always particularly easy to find how to get Gmail to A, create new folders, and B, to filter from your in-basket into some of these other folders. It takes a little bit of clicking around to find it.
Or to find the send button every time they update it and move it somewhere else.
Or to find the send button, or if it's Google Earth, because it's in beta permanently, they change the interface every few weeks, and the button you found over there suddenly moves over there. Or when you go into satellite view, you suddenly get this great big list of banner of photos, which I don't actually want because it takes up important space. So is it easy to use? Does someone irritate me by changing things all the time? Now that early work by Davis said usefulness was actually rather more important in terms of taking it up, actually using it, than ease of use, which is kind of interesting. And it actually is important in terms of the design, suggesting make it useful, really, really useful, and then people will use it rather than spend all your time making it idiot-proof or so simple that you don't have to think about it. And if you think about Jakob Nielsen's HCI type of work that I'm sure Dennis has already talked to you about, has he? Talked to you about Jakob Nielsen?
Probably has done at some stage, yeah.
You should have done by now because you're over halfway through the term, and he is the leading expert in human-computer interface design. He works with the Nielsen-Norman group, who really spend a lot of time on it, and they produce an enormous amount of output every week or two that helps you to understand where things are going. They did research into use of web pages, and they talked about the F of a web page. We scan across the top, we scan down the side, and then somewhere in the middle we scan a short way across, and those are the areas that you make sure the most important information is. So ease of use leads to usefulness, leads to usage, and so there is a causality chain there. And so he overrides some of his statement by saying, actually, yeah, I know that usefulness is most important, but then ease of use does help with usefulness. So maybe we do think about design of the functionality as well. A little while later, 11 years to be precise, he started actually expanding upon what were those external factors that actually are helping people to drive people's particularly perceived usefulness, if you compare that with TAM 1. So, am I being, if we look at the top item with voluntariness, am I being forced to use it, or do I just think I want to, I'd like to? And then you've got peer pressure. Does it affect my image that I'm anti-IT or pro-IT or technology? Is it relevant to my job? Does it help improve the quality of my output? And things like that. And so they did some more research which introduced that. And there's an article by Venkatesh and Davis. Venkatesh was actually a PhD student at the time researching with Davis. And you'll get all those extra questions that came out there. Then, a little bit later still, Venkatesh and others came up with a refinement of technology acceptance model 1 and 2 to bring out this unified theory of acceptance and usage of technology, which is kind of the stages of development. Similar factors coming in here, but looking rather more at some of the, what you might call the workplace social context. Remember, all of this is being done in the context of business at the time. However, having done the research in the business field, there are also expected to be connections to our own private life, where some of these actually still happen. In different areas. I don't know quite where you guys have got to. You're either using Facebook or you've decided you're not using Facebook because your parents are keeping track of you kind of thing through friends and so on. And I know quite a lot of younger people are moving away from Facebook to something else. And so there are big social influences happening there. And a complete set of questions relating to all the factors and full definitions come out of that as well, which will help you to think about, again, how to design this new IT service. How to make it useful, how to make it usable, how to make it easy to use, and then, as a result of that, make it more likely that your customers, the users, are going to be able to use it quickly, effectively, and productively improve their self-image, improve their image with their peer groups, and hey, I'm going to use it. And I actually have a PhD student who's looking at the development of M-banking, mobile banking, using the app on your phones, for example, within the UK to try and understand some of the factors that actually help to get M-banking out there amongst their clients so that it reduces the costs for the bank. That's why they're doing M-banking, partly because it makes it cheaper. They don't have to have cashiers in the banks. And if you think about Lloyds, they just announced
Yeah, they're going to lose.
2,500?
Yeah, and then they're going to put like £1 billion into invest into the MR services.
Yeah, so they're going to invest £1 billion, they're going to get rid of a large number of staff, and because they think that we out here really want to use all these online and mobile banking mechanisms to help them save money. Well, I'm not going to do it to help them save money. And if you think about the announcement over the weekend by the government about this new virtual ID, now why they call it a virtual ID, it's a replacement for the old ID card system which got trashed and canned when the Conservative government came in 4 years ago, which hadn't worked. The idea is to provide you with a means of always being able to prove your identity. Because with identity theft running at 800 million thefts of identity this last 12 months, part of the time it becomes very, very difficult to prove who you are. If someone has got your date of birth, your bank account numbers and details, your full name, and all the other things that make up your identity, maybe your passport number, it becomes incredibly difficult to prove who you are. And so what the government is wanting to do is, instead of having to go in when you apply for a passport, you have to take in your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, and all these other things as paper, which we'll hopefully get back to you at some stage. They want to have some mechanism that you can trust, that they can trust, that other people can trust, that is guaranteed to show it's you. Because biometrics don't necessarily prove it if the biometric encryption algorithms have been broken, which are bound to be at some stage. And what the government is suggesting for this new virtual ID for the UK is it will be handled by up to 6 independent organisations, including the 2 major credit reference agencies, Experian, for example. Pardon?
Don't trust them.
Yeah, who do we trust? And by having the virtual ID split across 6 independent organisations, they're hoping that we will feel safer because no one can actually connect everything together so
Well,
easily.
wouldn't that lead to even more corruption? Because then you don't know what's going on. And
You know what we're gonna do
that
with
still
it.
doesn't stop them
Still
from
don't
making
know.
an oligopoly, just deciding behind closed doors what they want to do.
Well, if you have your sort of Eastern European background where the levels of trust are even lower than here,
Yeah.
no, I can understand that point. And so, why would any of us here want to volunteer to be one of the first 500,000 to go and try this new machinery?
I really think about it.
I'm alright.
Yeah,
I want to do it.
Yeah, quite. Why should I waste? Because they're going to issue you with an ID and a password, which no doubt will be a complicated one. So I've got to store it on my gadget or somewhere, and they'll then, I have to have a mobile phone as well to do it. If I haven't got a mobile phone, I can't take one out because they send an email or something, or something back, a separate code, a second code to here. And so I've got to store that on here. So anybody who nicks that, unless I've got one of the gadgetries in here set up, which I haven't done, that securely holds bits and pieces.
Is it voluntary? Or is it have
At
to?
the present time, it's a bit sort of an alpha test almost for the first 500,000 people who really want to do it. And you can actually use this whole model, TAM and UTAUT, to see who might actually and why might people actually want to volunteer for it. And you'll be looking for people who are really techie, who love technology for technology's sake, and are the very, very early adopters. So, build your working bibliography, get all of those articles, do the research, find a few more sources, critiquing, developing the whole idea of the TAM and the UTAUT approach to why do we take them up, why do we use them, why do we reject them. But there is an important point. CAM2 and UTAUT actually give us a set of questions that help the top two levels of the Zachman architecture, the planners, the owners, to think very deeply and very carefully about the nature of what they're proposing to do. Because if they really do want to save money, which the government thinks that it's going to save them a factor of 20 on the costs, because we don't have to go to their facilities, they don't have to pay the post office to do the vetting of your passport application and so on, or mobile banking, because we don't need those 2,500 staff, we can close down other branches because people aren't going to be going there. Now, there's a lot of mileage for some of these organisations. It might mean we get a better service, it might mean we get a worse service. And if you think about the critiques or the critical reports about the energy companies in the country.
I can imagine in London places like really busy and stuff like that, that would work out that idea of internet banking and everything online, because everyone's going to have a phone in the central London places like branches. Any branches there can get shut down. Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Like places like further out where there's
rubbish internet. Right.
Yep. Or you're in one of those not spots where there is no coverage for your mobile phone, or it's very bad, or only one provider is there. And if it's not your provider, you don't have a mobile phone at all.
Yeah.
It's always the phone at the end of the day, it's just ringing.
Yeah.
As well as all the non-technical
Get in the car
people.
and walk to the-
My
go to the
parents still
shop.
refuse to get a smartphone because they can't figure out how to use it.
Yeah. Can well understand that. Or that, I mean, my father couldn't because he needs a phone keypad that large.
Yeah, that's
Because
my
his
father.
his vision is so bad now that he needs big buttons with letters about that large, and he still has to look at it with a magnifying glass. So he couldn't use one of those because he could probably, well, you know, when opened up like that, you know, he wouldn't be able to see the virtual soft keypad. So there's lots of things to think about. And you can use this whole approach as well, both as a critique of an existing service and as part of your ideas for specifying an improvement to that service. So it links to both aspects of the assignment. Critique the existing version, develop or propose, based on all of this stuff, an improvement or even a brand new one. That's how it all locks together. And then, very small, here's the 5 sources about TAM and UTAUT. There is actually a newer version of the UTAUT, UTAUT2, which came out about 2 or 3 years ago, which you might also want to pick up on to get the very latest perspectives on the questions. So, those are the sort of things I want you to be thinking about today. And then think about we can have a little discussion, if you'd like a discussion about the Zachman architecture framework. And then having done all of that thinking, start applying both of those areas, the stakeholder side and the ease of use ideas, in terms of the second half of the session, the workshop session, where you're developing your assignment now.